we're going to talk about politics. And speaking of politics, some people would think that it's far from ourselves and it involves all bad or corrupting. While some would argue that it's just politics is just everything in our lives. And in today's podcast, besides three co-hosts, me, Parm, Ink, and Poom, we have our guests, Wan from Dome and Suki from Singapore. So, anyways, I guess, uh, do any of you guys have any ideas or opinions on politics?
I guess we can start with what does politics mean in our opinion?
Mm. Yeah.
So
Yeah, sure.
all right, so can you guys go first? I kind of need some time to think.
Please
Okay,
don't judge us
so
out.
if I start,
Sure.
okay, so I think that politics is how we as a society like decide on how we should like run and like we should use how like a government should tax its people and how the taxes can be used to like improve society, right? So like I think that's the main like definition of what I think politics is. So like all the things about like democracy and like elections is about how we decide as a society on how our government should be ran, basically.
Okay.
Personally, I think politics are universal because like even in the past, there are always like ruler and they are voting. Even in Buddhism or in maybe other religions. But I think in the present, politics are about power, influences, force, authority, and politics also about who gets what, when, and how.
Yeah. Personally, like I think politics is about how like an organization or society is able to like sustain through like decision makings and through like power and ruling and authorities and those other stuff. And like
I think, okay, you can continue.
okay, I think like personally like I'm not that into like it, but I think it's like a very important part and it's very necessary and like I think it's also something that happens naturally as well.
I think politics is just how a group of people, maybe a single people or all citizens in the country, uh, work together to shape how the future of the country or the world is going to be. So next, maybe one should talk.
Yes. So to me, politics is it relates to the structure of power in a society. This is more uh, this is more or less this has been the case for I think many years with regards to how power is distributed in a country or even in ancient city states in the past where there have been kings or rulers and stuff like that, and they were the ones who governed. And so I would argue that politics generally means the structure of power in society, and something along the areas of what you guys said. I think they were all valid points with regards to the meaning of politics.
So I think we should talk about the main concepts of politics. Can you continue this point?
By the way, what do you mean by the whole concept of politics? Like,
Sorry, come again.
you mean the whole concept of politics, right?
Um, is that a question? Well, I did say that, to me, politics is about the structure of power or the organization of power in a society. And, they're also generally related to how a society is governed, something along those lines. Does that answer your question?
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
let's move on to like our next points, I guess, of like I think we're gonna be focused on like we're gonna be focusing on like American politics, maybe some of like Thai politics and like in general
Mm.
politics in general too. So I think
So
yeah, Poon, you can go.
so when it comes to politics, what are like the general ideologies? Like I think we should talk about liberal and conservative first.
Mm. Well, let me just say liberal and conservative is a very simplified version of ideologies in politics. In reality, it's very much more complicated than just liberal and conservative, but it's been pretty widely adopted and used because of this simplicity. I would argue even it's pretty oversimplified, but liberal and conservative are uh, mainly used in American society because there are only two parties, two major political sides there, as opposed to uh, other countries in, say, Europe or even Thailand, where there are many political parties and ideologies at play. But basically, liberal and conservative, they are the two opposing ideologies. And do you want me to go over what they mean?
Yeah, yeah. I think we should like go
Sure.
into river with the meaning.
Okay, so generally, a liberal refers to a person who is more progressive socially, who is willing to accept new ideas and new forms of government or ideas, such as support for the LGBTQ community or support for abortions or something along that line. Economically, there are people who are for bigger government, who are for more spending and generally also more taxes. They believe, most of them, at least because, as I've said, it's pretty simplified version of politics, but most of them believe in the role of government should be to help the disadvantaged, help the poor, and promote equality, something along those lines. Whereas a conservative would be a person who is more, uh, well, I wouldn't say unwilling, but more uh, adamant on already settled ways and traditions, such as the thinking that I've encountered is it's always been done this way and it's been pretty good this way. So trying to change it wouldn't be better. And this goes to social policies such as um, uh, maybe, as we've seen, they are quite reluctant to give rights to the LGBTQ community, at least still in some countries. Uh, they are not so accepting of abortion, and something along those lines. Now, economically, a conservative is one who advocates for smaller government, so less taxes, less public spending on stuff like unemployment benefits or childcare and stuff like that. So less spending on that, and at the same time also less taxes. They would argue that these smaller taxes would benefit the people by giving them more money to spend rather than giving their money to, like, say, the government. And so this is basically a very, very brief and simplified explanation of liberal and conservative.
I think that's pretty thorough definition, and I would like to add. I think you talk about taxes, and obviously in the U.S. the taxes quite low relatively to Canada, and I saw I think quite a lot of businesses move to the US because of the low taxes. So low taxes also kind of promote like new businesses, while higher tax I think kind of like focus on social benefits or like healthcare or free education. I think which we can see a little bit more in Canada, but both country obviously follows democracy, so I think that's quite interesting as well.
Yeah, but to be economically left doesn't mean you're socially left, right?
That is a very good point because, as I've said, liberal and conservative, a very simplified uh, way of looking at political ideology. And so that is a valid point that Bam is making. So a person may be economically left, but in social policy, they may be conservative. They may be opposed to such liberal policies in terms socially. While a conservative, they could be economically conservative, lower taxes, small government, something like that, while still advocating for LGBTQ rights or something like that. So this liberal and conservative is definitely a simplified way of looking at politics.
Mm. Yeah, so I guess to like simplify it a bit more, like it's a term that you can't like because each of us are like very different. Not like each of us as like person, but like humans are like very different. So like you're not gonna be like entirely liberal or entirely conservative. You're gonna have like a mix of both, and depending on like your experiences and on like your viewpoint on each matters, because there are like a lot of different matters and subjects that these two are different or like opposing, I would say, right?
Yes, yes,
Mm,
I would agree.
yeah. So I guess you can't really like call anyone an entirely liberal or an entire or like entirely conservative.
That is true,
Yeah,
though, in the US. Oh,
it's kind of like a spectrum thing, right? Because like if you say black and white, like obviously I think most of us are kind of like somewhere around here, like in the gray area. So I think that's also the same with liberal and conservative as well.
yes. And I was
Hmm.
going to make the point that uh, generally in the United States, liberal and conservative, they're also uh, used along with the left and right spectrum. So a liberal person would be someone on the left of the political spectrum, and on the right, and a conservative would be someone on the right of the political spectrum. Now, I can expand on that if you want, on the political spectrum if you want, but if we have other topics we can move on to, that's fine as
Hmm.
well.
Um, so I guess we can talk about political jargons as well, which I believe are kind of like words and phrases that politicians use.
Sure, there are plenty of those. You can give me a question about them and I'll answer them best I can.
What do you think about fake news and
Yeah,
like the term fake news? I think
uh,
it's quite huge in the US because people have bias and like people want their side to gain an advantage over others, so they kind of like there are a lot of fake news and like let's say news that are biased to one side.
hmm.
So let's say what fake news is first. Personally, fake news is misinformation uh, distributed to the public, intended to make the public aware or believe in something or some group of people,
Hmm.
especially politically.
Yeah, to add to like that definition, I think more specifically about fake news. Fake news have to be like deliberate by someone to like gain advantages or gain something. In this case, like of politically, I think the most like prominent things would be to sway votes. So just like an example would be like in the 2016 elections.
I think
Well,
another
okay,
yeah,
sure.
yeah. I think another key example is in the 2020 elections, like there were a lot of claims of like election fraud and stuff like that,
Mm,
which then led to the January 6th incident. So I think that fake news definitely has real life consequences, and like even like politicians like Donald Trump like embrace these like fake news and like fake claims, and he himself like still kind of believes that like the election is kind of like fraudulent, is kind of the 2020 election is like rigged, I guess. So I think that like fake news has, by your on your point, fake news has definitely been a lot more prevalent, I guess,
Hmm.
now more than ever, I guess. Yeah.
Yes, well, fake news, misinformation, it affects a lot of aspects of life, but for our sake, we'll only focus on the politics side of it. And I believe that, these fake news, it's very damaging for a democracy. And we've seen a crystal clear example in the United States where you have a certain group of people who are trying to promote uh, false statements and, false information pretty much all the time, every day. Ever since 2016, they've been trying to uh, if not totally lie and change the facts, then put a positive spin to make it, themselves look good or something like that, which is problematic because uh, there starts to emerge two different streams of information.
mm, okay.
They will stop believing in the real information and they'll instead be uh, drawn into these group of facts, these statements that are completely untrue. And what that means is when you have these uh, false statements, especially ones that are damaging to democracy by saying that elections aren't fair and by encouraging violence and make trying to encourage people not to accept a result of a democratic election, then you have these people who are radicalized and who basically they get lost because these fake news has led them astray. So I definitely believe it's a very big problem for democracy, and as I've said, uh, example number one is the United States.
Okay.
Neglectedly, we have to talk about the impact of social media. As Wan mentioned in 2016 election, right? Yes, Donald Trump hired the company called Cambridge Analytica to buy swing voters data and information from Facebook. And then I guess they just uh, use the algorithm of Facebook to stimulate uh, some fears such as Islamophobia or xenophobia to make them vote for Trump.
Hmm. Yes, I believe very good point that you mentioned is social media, how it has really accelerated and helped the growth of fake news, especially with the sometimes pretty lax rules being enforced in these areas where there's an environment where misinformation can pretty quickly spread without any intervention from the company, social media company. And so when you have in the past, uh, your main source of information would come from the TV or from the newspaper, which back then the whole idea was to deliver the truth, to give people the information, the essential information. But nowadays it's been transformed into telling people what they want to hear, more like. and so you've got people who are waking up and watching, say, well, a conservative would wake up and probably watch a conservative news channel, and when they go on social media where their feed is personalized, as many social media companies do, they will only see the content that they like or that they prefer, which would almost certainly be content that is also conservative. And meanwhile, a liberal would probably wake up and watch liberal TV and also have more exposure to liberal content. So I am not saying that this is inherently wrong in any way, but I think it creates this uh, sort of political chasm between the two sides, and uh, not to mention the fact that the one side is already believing in a set of lies and false information. So it's when you have that happen, you have half the country believing in something and half the country believing in another thing. It's not going to end well, and so yeah.
Social media would make people more separated, right? So
Yeah,
probably thinking wants to talk with somebody.
social media is it's not a great place for information. It's it's mainly a place to talk about personal experiences or entertainment and stuff. But when their uh, information, especially politics, get involved, there are people who will try to influence uh, maybe unwitting voters or unwitting people who uh, aren't wise enough to distinguish between this facts and this spin of theirs to try to take advantage of them and try to misguide them in terms of politics.
And I think it's especially like dangerous too when like the two that we are talking about are like two opposing point of views, and they're like each side feeding to each other, and the side's also feeding to each other, but also like feeding hate to like both sides, like crossing like this. It can cause like a lot of like chaos and violence and like hatreds towards like politics too. Uh, and then, yeah, as Asuki mentioned about like the January 6th.
Mm. Yes, I think in the past, politics was more about how to work together to govern a country. And while that may mean like some disagreements and uh, some differences in ideology, but generally the people in power in politics, they would try to get the best for their country, try to get the best of what they believe in. But like nowadays, it's become more of a fight between two sides who are, or at least seem like, are more interested in winning over the other side than working together and governing the country well. As I can't say from personal experience, but as I believe it was in the past.
Yeah, very good point. So to classify people's ideas on politics or views on politics, it's about political ideologies, right? There are different ideologies right now.
Well, yes, sort of. Well, it is sometimes hard to classify a person into some sort of political ideology because it is so varied. But um,
Yeah, go ahead.
it is generally. I think the point that you were making. Yeah, it is generally valid. Mm.
I
So
think that
so
most people would classify themselves into political ideologies. Like
Mm.
we wouldn't have to classify them for them basically.
Mm.
Like even the Thai political party parties, some parties definitely have like their own ideology that they kind of tell themselves that they kind of like identify with.
And I think to add on to that, because like some people wanted to like simplify their thoughts and point of view, so they have like some like two or three things in common with like the policies or the ideologies of this party. So they would classify themselves as like this party supporter exclusively, right? Because like
Mm.
our minds is like so weird and like so vast that sometimes we don't even like think of some like sometimes we can't even think of like uh overall things or things that might have like been different in like the this party I'm kind of rambling things that might have been like different from like parties to parties, but you might have to like you might change your viewpoint and agree to one party because you agree to like some other like matters to some other matters as well. So you might have like be like influenced by this party to change your point of view on like this subject that you might not have agreed with as well.
Hmm. Well, I think it really depends on specific situations in specific countries. It is pretty hard to predict, the thinking, to know the thinking of the population of how they view the situation politically. But if I were to say, for example, in the United States, where you have two choices between the Democrats and the Republicans, there and there are a certain group of swing voters who get to decide the election, and so there's not going to be a lot of, at least nowadays, a lot of swinging between ideologies, swinging between each sides, because they are more, as I've, with other factors, not excluding the reality chasm of the facts that has been opened in their politics, that their voters are generally more or less confined to their parties and probably not going to move anywhere, at least, or at least if there's going to be some movement, then it won't be drastic as in some other countries, such as in um, I'm trying to think of an example of a country where uh, politics is. I can't give you a specific example yet, but there are countries where politics is less about ideology than more about good governing, about voting for people who you think will be best to govern the country. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you will neglect their political views about what they stand for, but maybe they will prioritize the person who is going to come in and govern based on their qualities and or whether or not they're qualified, more or less than about the political ideology which they believe in, which I think it really depends on each country and a lot of other factors. But as I've said, I think it varies a lot country by country.
Oh yeah,
Because that's
just
kind of like um Obama's like winning election 2 times. Because I think people from opposite party, like people who support opposite party also like his personality as well. And I think he's one of the most influential presidents as far as I know.
Well, I think that like another clear example would kind of be Thailand. Like here, we recently had the Bangkok governor election, right? And a candidate from like the opposition party, he was an ex person from the opposition party, had actually won like 55, 56%, around that percent of the votes, even though like Thailand is Bangkok is usually quite a conservative city conservative city compared to like the rest of the country. So I think that like Thailand is definitely more personality based and ideologically based. for um for a country than like um the United States, for example. You can disagree. I'm
No,
seeing
Hmm.
everyone's face like,
it
but
is
I
a
think
good.
that's I think
Yeah, Wan, you can go. But
No, no,
I
I was just saying that I agree because, yeah, because there is not. It might partly be because parties in Thailand sometimes they can change a lot, and there are constantly being new parties and stuff, and there's not really a big base or big uh, group of voters who will vote consistently for this party in every election, and they won't swing away. But so I would agree that in Thailand it's more about uh, personality and people who can best govern the country than the actual policies and ideologies that the party represent.
um, I, I have a question. During the last big election in Thailand, um, there were like several parties, right? I think around 23 or something, and I know it's kind of unrelated to the topic, but why do you think there are so many parties in Thailand, especially right now compared to like the US, which only has like two sides, right? And like a few or two independent candidates.
Hmm. Well, whoa, there are a lot of factors, I believe, but I think in Thailand, generally, it is very easy to start a political party. I think basically the pretty much the only thing you would need is money. And so if you've managed to have enough money, then you can probably form a party pretty much pretty quickly. Uh, and I'm not saying that these parties are going to be successful in the next election or something like that, but the rules around making a political party are pretty lax. But meanwhile, in the United States, it's I don't know specific details about how to form a party there, but I would say it's more difficult than in Thailand based on the number of parties they have, and also it is also their type of politics where they've been there's only there's only been two major parties uh, who are pretty much who dominate the whole political scene, and so I think the mindset there is basically if you vote for another party other than Democrat or Republican, you are wasting your vote, and because like
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure both sides accept this that there is not going to be uh, another party who is going to be able to win an election. You know, the best they can do is maybe like an independent, but uh, generally, I think uh, mm, not 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 enough support, not enough uh, sort of that sort of thing for another party. And if I may just add a little bit, there might be some appetite for a new party since a lot of people are frustrated, but um, right now it's not happening. And
Mm.
mm,
okay.
So for
I think
So
there
I
Thailand,
think
are
that
among
yeah.
so for
Go ahead.
Thailand, among all factors, the main one I would say is because of the laws and articles from the recent constitution, which uses this system of I don't know like MMP, right?
oh, you want to get into systems right away?
No,
party-based MPs, right? So I
I was
think that
just talking about the main reason why there are many political parties recently.
I would agree with Palm here that like the main reason is the system in which the elections are held. Like for example, in the US, there's actually like a couple of like other non-main major parties like the Libertarian and the Green parties, right? And I think that like if you compare the electoral system of Thailand and the US, in the US it's first past the post and it's like an electoral college. I won't go into detail, but there's only one winner, and just as you said that you can't really form a coalition with other like parties in the US. Like compare that to like Thailand and like the most recent constitution where you have like these like party list MPs which like really favors like small parties, like most like there's like I think like 20 MPs from like single parties who like needs like only like 5,000 votes like throughout the country, and I think that they already got a seat. Like compare that to the US, and there's nothing like really like that. And if you compare it to like other countries which also has a lot of parties, like Netherlands for example, the system is quite like similar. Like the Netherlands and Germany also have like similar party list systems, which kind of favors like small parties and coalition governments more.
Mm. So this is a good point that I forgot to mention, but yes, based on this parliamentary system in Thailand, and as you've said, in like Germany and UK and other places, where it is much easier for smaller secondary, third parties to exist because of how the system of elections and how that sort of thing is held, rather than in the United States where the system favors two large parties. So I'm not going to repeat everything you said, but a good point in saying that the political system, the government system there definitely affects the amount of parties that have been able to gain representation and get into power and stuff.
But I guess in smaller scales, like let's say Bangkok election, I guess there are a lot more people who engage in like in as a candidate. For example, in London mayor elections, there are so a lot of people, like from 10 to 15 people who are the candidates. I wonder if that's I don't think that is the case for the US, but I just want to bring a point that it's quite interesting to see how the smaller like areas play out compared to like the major arenas, because
Well, I mean, I believe there were also a lot of candidates in Bangkok's race. I think there were like 30 or something, but they were mostly like independent or smaller parties, or no one had ever heard of them, something like that. But um, it is really hard to generalize politics because a lot of it really depends on many different factors, and that really varies from a lot of different countries. I think you mentioned the London mayoral election. Um, I mean, I'm not sure how many candidates there are, or I'm not too familiar with the background, but um, I think those smaller parties, they are, well, I think there's a sort of thinking among most people that in like the first past the post system, which I believe London has and Bangkok has, and I think the UK also has it and America also has it, which is that in a first past the post system, you would generally want to vote for the bigger parties, because if you risk it, say like per se risk it and vote for a smaller party that may be more in line to your views, you could risk uh, another party that you don't like getting into power. It's sort of, this is getting more complicated now. This is like tactical voting, but say if I were, say in England, I hope you can follow me with the parties. If you were a Labour Party supporter and maybe this time you don't really like the Labour candidate, but you really like more the candidate from the Liberal Democratic Party or the Green Party, but you are afraid of voting for them because if too many people think like you and vote for the other candidate, you might split your vote enough for the Conservative Party candidate to win. And so I think the reason why people are a bit, at least in these countries, unwilling to go to smaller parties is because they're afraid that their their vote won't count or something like that, because it's a first past the post system, and so it doesn't matter if you don't reach 50%. You can just win if you have more votes than the other candidates, and so they would try to vote more strategically, I think.
Mm, okay, very interesting.
For the London mayoral election, according to the BBC, I think the small party candidates are just trying to campaign or address some of the problems to the elected candidate. There's even a YouTuber who campaigned for the election also.
Hmm.
So
I think
I guess
it
the
I think
next
that they
that's
were yeah, go ahead.
um so I guess the next topic is gonna be forms of governments, right? So currently, right now, most countries are ruled democratically. Probably not de facto, but at least in the constitution.
Hmm.
So we can compare and contrast the democracy and autocracy.
Well, yes, these are two major uh, categories or ways to differentiate the forms of government, meaning that in a democracy, the power to, uh, make decisions about society generally rests with the population, albeit in most cases not directly. Like, there are very few cases where people vote, every person in the country votes on every issue being discussed, but rather in a representative democracy where people elect representatives and send them to a certain body, say the national parliament, for to represent them and their ideas. But um, on the other hand, you have an autocracy where the people are generally they generally do not have any sort of say in how their country is governed, as opposed to, as I mentioned before, democracy, where the people will have a say. But this is, I think, basically the biggest difference between these forms is that the ultimate power rests with the people in one form, well, supposedly or should be rests with people in a democracy in one form, while in another, the people have very little say in how the country is governed.
I think so, to simplify that a bit. I think the reason, one reason why democracy is very popular in this like modern world is because it's in line with like what people actually need and what people wanted, right?
Hmm. Well, I would agree that democracy would be the form of government that most people want, though I would have to argue that right now we're seeing a drop, we're seeing a backsliding of democracies in a lot of places. But I do believe that many people, they would definitely prefer to be in a democracy rather than in an autocracy.
I guess a lot of people want freedom, but obviously with freedom, there are more responsibilities, like in terms of your personal responsibilities, I think, because like if you are in an authoritarian state, then obviously the government will kind of like um will moderate everything.
Yes, I would agree that while, people do have more rights and freedoms under a democracy, uh, they also have to be mindful of the responsibilities that they are given with this freedom. They have to be care not to abuse it and stuff like that. Whereas in an autocracy, there's very little tolerance for disobedience, and people generally don't have much freedom to decide, much. So like, the point that you made is pretty valid. I would agree with that.
What are some like examples of
So
autocracy right
okay,
now?
okay.
I think we should mention some like examples of like some autocracy countries or like ruling systems.
Can I add
Oh,
something?
Sure.
Yeah,
I think
sure.
that like the democracy autocracy thing is more of like a spectrum than and like actual like this country is a democracy, this country is an autocracy, so something like that. Like there's like a democracy, like for example like in the US, right? A democracy is supposed to be like something that most citizens like agree with, right? But instead of that happening, like for example, like there's this case where like Roe v. Wade is getting cancelled, and that like there could like each individual state could be like implementing abortion bans, right? Even though like most people in the US would disagree with banning abortion themselves. So I think that countries like the US or other countries may be like less democratic than more than other like countries, for example. And
Mm,
then there could be like more a lot more like for example like I would say that like countries like North Korea would definitely be more autocratic than like maybe some other countries that you wouldn't consider like democracies like Thailand, but then there would still be more, but North Korea would still be more like autocratic. So I don't agree with the main like framing that like there are democracies and they are autocracies.
mm, okay.
Well, pretty valid point. So as I've said, politics is really complicated and not so easily generalized. And so while there is, a very clear distinction between some democracies and autocracies, there are also some democracies that are less democratic and more autocratic than they
mm.
seem, or vice versa. So it is more of complicated than just a country is a democracy and country is a autocracy, and it's definitely, there are many factors, and there are some countries. I think you were going to ask me to give an example, so I'm going to give you some. So in a country like, for example, Germany or Norway or something, Denmark and uh, many other European countries, these countries are, they're pretty much the ideal democracies. They're not, uh, they generally have, uh, you know, freedoms, and they really don't have any, you know, undemocratic, uh, what do you call it, characteristics in their system. And then there are some countries like, for example, the United States, which is a democracy still, but there are some uh, major problems with the system. And I think there might be some disagreements, but I think generally Thailand falls in this category. We're still technically a democracy. We do have elections. We can vote, but there are some also major flaws. For example, in the Senate, and while, as I mentioned before, in the United States, the flaws are such as not uh, proportionate representation under the electoral college that can, sometimes, uh, what do you call, dilute, not dilute, but like skew the result in favor of a certain party or a certain candidate. But these are countries that, as I said again, are still generally democratic, but there are a lot of aspects which uh, are also autocratic and go against the whole idea of democracy. And then you've got autocracies that are well, most of them that are pretending, or at least trying to pretend to be democracies. They have, mock elections, and but generally the people don't really have any say in the results, and these elections are generally not free or fair. And there are a lot of examples we can give. For
Even
example,
North Korea has an election.
yes, it's very funny. North Korea has an election. You guys need to Thailand.
Mm.
They have an election where you're given a paper and there's only one name on it, and you can cross that name out if you want. But if you want to do that, then you have to go out in some sort of wide open table where there's a pen and cross it out. So it's not really a democratic value of secrecy on how you want to vote. That's already been violated. And besides, you don't really have a choice anyway. You only have one name on the paper, and so this is an autocracy that's pretending to be uh, a democracy, basically. And we have many of that here, but uh, that is basically a autocracy. And some people may categorize Thailand in this category, but I would say that uh, while I don't dispute that there were some very suspicious irregularities in the last election, that Thailand is still generally more of a flawed democracy rather than an autocracy that's pretending to be democratic. Though you guys can disagree with me on this.
Probably the most autocratic countries are Turkmenistan, Eritrea, some sort of that. But
Yeah.
we can look at some countries which are communist, like Laos, Vietnam, and China. They don't even have any elections.
I'm not sure. I don't know if they do have, but if they do, then there's not going to be a choice or anything like that. So, as I've said, there are at least, in my view, there are many more autocracies or societies which are more autocratic in nature than democratic, who are in this country right now. For example, if we look at all our neighbors, let's see, Myanmar is ruled by the military, Laos is by a communist, Cambodia is right now effectively a one-party state, and the only neighbor that we have that is relatively democratic is Malaysia. So um, this it's not a great time for democracy right now, but uh, I think we've strayed from the point a bit. We were talking more about the difference between autocracies and democracies.
You have to mention Singapore.
Ooh,
I'm
Singapore is
sure
an
it's a
interesting one.
habitat country. That's your habitat, Suki.
Ooh, Singapore is one of those countries where they are a democracy, but they are dominated by only one party. And I think another example of this that I can think of is Japan. And I'm not sure if there's any more uh, countries. There might be more, but it's a rare circumstance where a party has been in power for a very long time and has been consistently reelected and returned to power in a free and fair election in like Japan and Singapore. And so, uh, I mean, if you were to define democracy as having many options and stuff, I mean, they certainly do, and they have elections that are free and fair, but uh, they are pretty much governed by one party, and so some people may say that that's not a very democratic democratic I'm gonna break into Thai. It's not a very democratic uh, value or a democratic characteristic, but it is. Genuinely democracies where one party has done so well, and so it is very interesting. These type of systems, they're very rare and interesting.
Okay, I think that what you said about free and fair elections, I'm not going to comment on a specific country, but I think there are definitely a lot more aspects on like how you're supposed to ensure that elections are fair and free. This means like you have certain rights for some countries that have some countries freedom of assembly where you can state your protests freely basically and freedom of the press, where like people can like criticize their politicians and like spread like to criticize like our politicians. So I think that there are a lot more aspects to democracies than just the right to vote, basically. And to add on that, like for example, like I think the latest Thai election, right? I think that there may be like voter fraud where like people are intentionally like rigging the election by like putting fake votes into the voting booth. But I think that there are a lot more like problematic features of the election system. Like for example, like the election was like conducted during like in a military junta like regime, so that they certainly like the press was certainly not that free to like express their views, and that people were like there were definitely a lot more like there were the constitution, for example, was quite questionable, and like there were a lot of like constitutional court rulings that were quite that favored the um government parties, basically. So I think that certainly it's important for like people to be able to vote, but I think that there are certainly like more democratic systems than others, basically. Yeah.
Hmm. Yes,
Very
that's
good point, Suki.
yeah.
You guys have anything to add more?
Yeah,
Otherwise, I'm
I
gonna move
wrote like
on because it's
I wrote yeah, I think we are kind of running out of time, but I wrote like 5 things to talk about on this day, really. But I think that's a very good point about freedom of speech as well, because we have touched on fake news, right? And I feel like in the current world, obviously when there are more freedom, I guess a lot of people wrote stuff like write stuff online and consume a lot of it. So I feel like there are a lot of medias out there, and like I think freedom of speech is and fake news is an interesting points. And you also said about mm, like Japan or Singapore with only like one main party. Do you think competition is is like important for politics?
All right. So, question by question. Your first question regarding the fake news and the freedom of speech. I think it's very interesting to see how it's playing out, as there is a very varied opinions on the topic of how far should freedom of speech go before it's becoming harmful, and if uh, if whether or not we should be restricting some of that the freedom of speech if the speech is going to affect or potentially harm people, which it's pretty widely debated. And as and I think a clear, I'm maybe not that clear, but an interesting example of this is in Twitter, where I'm not sure the recent developments, whether Elon Musk has already owned it yet. I think he was planning to, but I'm not sure of the recent development. But he has he has been a supporter of the, or as he says, the freedom of speech, and as he said, he would even restore some people to the platform. You know who I'm talking about, I think, Donald Trump, who have in the past said things that were harmful, such as encouraging violence in the Congress in January 6th. Who and he said he would restore his account because it was based on the principle of freedom of speech. And so there are people who would argue that this is correct because it's essentially freedom of speech. You can say what you want, but there are also some people who say that okay, yeah, I agree with freedom of speech, but shouldn't there be some guidelines to stop people from advocating for violence, from saying harmful things online. So it's a very interesting conflict taking place between those ideas. And now to your second question, which I believe was about competition in democracies. I certainly believe that it's very important to have an alternative to a government that is in power, to have and I think this applies to economics as well, that people like to say that the more competition there is, the more it will incentivize all the people who are competing with each other to be the best, to do better, to be above, to have the best product or have the best service, something like that. And so I believe something similar applies. This what do you call this principle sort of similarly applies to politics, where if you have, or at least in a society that has a good democracy, where if you have many parties who are competing, then you will have, as a result, you will have a situation where the parties will try to do their best to appeal to voters by making good policies and trying to govern well. And while this might not be so relatable to us or to many people, because the state of our democracies in some countries, but if I believe that if there is no alternative to a government, then it would be a very flawed democracy. It would be a pretty undemocratic principle not to have any option between just the government and another person or not another person, another entity or organization or party that has who has alternative ideas and stuff.
Can I add on something?
Yes.
And so I think that competition is like quite beneficial for democracy, but I think it's like I think a lack of competition can also benefit a country like greatly. For example, like Singapore, right? I think that like the fact that the country is being ran by like the same government for like I think 50 years is quite good for business, as like a lot of foreign investors like prefer to invest in countries like Singapore, which is a lot more stable, and they a lot more predictable that their investments would like pay off in comparisons to countries like Thailand, which is quite like unstable, and there are a lot of like coups and like government like a change in like government, which could like jeopardizes like government policies and like change the way like change the successfulness of a business basically. So I think that like I think another factor that could make like competition like less beneficial is that like a lot of countries like to please their citizens like in the short term to like win elections, instead of like thinking like long term and in the long run to like for like what is best for the country, right? Like I think that you can see that in Thailand, right? I think now like in the current government is like doing a lot of things right now to try to appease voters and for the upcoming election. And I think that although I agree with these policies, I think that it's not really a good way to run a country, to just like please the voters short term, like only during like the year before an election, and like ignore them entirely like for the rest of the year, basically, for the rest of the term. Yeah.
I would agree with your point that stability would be beneficial to, say, economically, to the country, say, economically and stuff. But I believe that, there can be an environment in a democracy where there is vibrant competition, where there is good competition between, a good democratic competition between the parties vying to govern, while still having a stable democratic system that doesn't have unpredictability issues, such as military coups, or having some sort of interruption in a peaceful transfer of powers. So while I would yes, I would commend the fact that it is good for stability, I would still argue that it is pretty vital for a country to have some at least another alternative to the people in power and opposition, basically.
Yeah.
But yeah, go on.
Okay. Like to add on to Suki's point a bit, I think an example would be like if like you have 4 years for a term and there's like a constant competition between like 4 years and 4 years and 4 years on and on and on, and you if you wanted to like start a project that would affect in the future or like the future generation or like a very long term project like maybe even like 10 years or like 20 years, doing that is like very hard to sustain if like the project will like contradicts the viewpoint of the oppositions and like the other parties. So like if you start a project for like 4 years, election and you lose, what would happen to the project? Will like the project still like get continued by the government, like the new government, or would the project be just stopped and scrapped? So that's like a dilemma of like competition versus like having a stable party.
Hmm. Yes, well, it really depends on, on specific situations, but it is an interesting situation that definitely can happen where uh, a government and an opposition, who swap back in power, who have diametrically opposed policies, they keep canceling basically the policies of the previous government that they didn't like, and this is more this is this I think it shows more of a uh, flaw in the way of how these politicians, how these people govern, rather than in a truly functional and ideal democracy where these two sides can actually agree on a form of basis, a sort of vision for the country that won't be tossed out every uh, election or every government when they're thrown out of power. The policies won't have to entirely change every time, and so it is more of a um, it is more of this kind of up to the people in these democracies to find consensus and try to uh, achieve at least a shared and long-lasting vision for the country. But still, I do note your point that this can be problematic in some circumstances.
I guess you can say that to Canada because I feel like Canada has a lot of resources, but um mm, I'm not sure if it's related, but I feel like they haven't fully optimized their resources yet. When it's come to like money or their natures and a lot of things, is Canada is a very like big country, but not a lot of people in it. So they do get some advantage over other countries in some aspects.
Hmm. Well, I don't have enough specific information to comment on this, but uh, it is pretty interesting.
So you guys, I guess you guys were making very good points on those topics. Our curiosity makes us rethink uh, different types of of form of government and democracy. I guess we're running out of time. We should move on to the next topic, which is politics in education.
Hmm.
You guys may mention like uh, border or territorial defense. We we have to join the classes soon, except Suki, which is studying in Singapore.
Mhm.
I
And
think there was a yeah, and me, but I still have to because I'm going to on an exchange program, but I guess I still has to like redo. I still has to redo that year, but I think I think that there has been some beefs about um like territorial defense, right?
Hmm.
Especially on Twitter, I think.
Well, what I'll say about politics I think the a more interesting topic would be politics in the youth for young people, which I think this is one aspect in Thailand where I think is probably better than most other countries, where young people can be really apathetic about voting, about politics, because well, many factors, but you can see in a lot of countries they are less interested in politics than, as you can see, Thai students are interested in our politics. And so I think this is one aspect where Thailand is actually good, where students and the younger generation are more interested in politics. But I guess that's partially because there's a lot of issues, there's a lot of controversies, there's a lot of debate around issues such as you mentioned, territorial defense, and other issues regarding the military government, the marriage equality, the so on and so forth. So um, I think this is I think I'm repeating myself too, but this is one place where Thailand is. This is one place, a good aspect of Thailand's um, political system, political orders, nature.
Another thing that I would like to like add on a bit why I think this topic would be like quite interesting to talk about is like how like teaching about politics, if like should you be like, because we can't like get all of our biases off, like naturally we can't be like, we're not robots, we can't like just throw out all of biases. We still have like, naturally we're still biased. Like, would a teacher that have like kind of like specific ideologies
Mm.
or like support each like views, would should they teach and like potentially influence their students, or like, I think it's also related to like how about like Thai cultures and teaching too, or how like should we like teach the youth about like politics, or like should we teach them like the general news, or should we teach them like some like general topics about politics, or should we like teach current events maybe? I think that's
Well,
the thing too.
um,
Go
uh,
ahead.
if you're done with the question, well, I think it is important for the young generation to know about how the country works, how it's governed, how the basics of politics and stuff. But I do hear your point about how sometimes a teacher's or someone's political ideology can bleed into that and mix with that. So I generally believe that it would be better if uh, they stick to the basics rather than just uh, speaking about political uh, opinions of theirs and trying to convince the children of that.
Oh, speaking of territorial defense, the saying that I can relate to is this, you can teach an old dog new tricks. Like most students have believed that the government is bad, um, the military is bad, so they can just teach. We have to believe in those old-fashioned stuff. And also, could we hear about educating students on politics in Singapore, Suki?
I don't think I'm comfortable commenting on that in public.
Oh,
Well, it I guess it is true to a certain extent in Thailand that there are a lot of teachers who is trying who I'm not sure if it's only the teachers, but I also see it in the education system where they're generally much more conservative than uh, what I what I see in other countries, because in Thailand there is a lot of trying to preserve the ways of the old, such as like uh what do you say, พระพุทธศาสนา Buddhism, where uh you the teachers are, well, I'm not saying that Buddhism is like bad or something, but I'm just saying they have given a lot of importance. They give a lot of importance to that, and they kind of emphasize on uh the what do you call it? The kind of I
Being a good Thai is being Buddhist, but
well, I mean, some may argue that this is where they're simply teaching the children like discipline and stuff, and trying to shape them into good citizens. And I won't want to insinuate that they aren't doing that. I'm sure most of them have good intentions, but at the same time, the curriculum and some of the teachers that are teaching are pretty wary of the newer generation, and they give more importance to old aspects of Thai society, which they're trying to pass on. But this is my opinion, but I don't know what you guys think.
Yeah, I think we are quite conservative in schools. We do like keep some old-fashioned stuff, and like my teacher, I think that maybe it was unrelated, but around like King Rama 5, the Western come to Thailand, right? And that time they sent like military, no, like missionaries here, and obviously they are quite conservative then, because like the church and religion at that time was quite like conservative, while in Thailand we are quite liberal. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if this is the best way to put it, but my teacher put it this way, and like we were not wearing shirt, and I guess that there was not like laws and a lot of regulations at that time, but in the present, I think it's kind of reverse. Thai people are more like conservative than the Europeans. I think we tend to keep a lot of cultures, and like why or like at school, or see like wearing uniform. I think that's a huge controversy as well, and other things, while Western has been very opening up to a lot of things.
very
What do you guys
controversial.
think? I think it's kind of interesting to see how it's a bit kind of reversed from the present to the past. So that's something to think about as well, I think.
I would also say that it would depend a lot on the situation at the moment, because I believe back then, when we were still had the ways of the old Kings Rama, like the 4 and the 5th, they were quite liberal uh, compared to their other predecessors, who had preferred to keep the status quo. And they did implement, as we've all learned many times, a great deal of reforms, and that helped towards modernizing Thailand. And there are many factors behind that. I think a major one would be that they're trying to deter Western invasion or aggression or annexation by trying to modernize and trying to keep up with the times, so they don't appear as primitive, so we don't appear as primitive. But the kings, well, I can't say much about the people of Thailand back then, whether they were conservative or liberal, because the power to change the country or to shape the policy of the country was not with them back then. It was still up to the king entirely. but the kings certainly did. Kings Rama like 4 and 5. They certainly did take the initiative to move the country forward, and in at the time, I'm pretty sure it was considered pretty liberal, and so when you compare that to Thailand now, there's not really much of a desire for the people to change, to modernize, to fit in more with the rest of the world, where uh, instead it's more of a feeling of we want to preserve our identity, we want to remain Thai, and if we want to do that, we have to remain different, we have to preserve our cultures and stuff. We don't we don't want to adopt some policies or something that other nations have adopted or something like that. But it is certainly interesting. As you said, I think it has like sort of switched, but it depends on a lot more of these environmental factors.
Yeah, I agree with Wan. At that time, during Rama 5, it was kind of the circumstances were kind of compelled Thailand to modernize in order to escape colonization.
Hmm.
There are also some controversies in Thai educational systems, like uh, sex education, right?
Hmm. Well,
Anyways,
yeah.
I guess that's
yeah,
doesn't like that
doesn't
kind of not related to politics, but I guess we can briefly talk about that,
Hmm.
or maybe it is related to politics. And
I think we should move on, maybe.
yeah, sure. Can we move on to uh, America as the archetype example of uh, modern democracy?
Sure.
today I have actually learned about Buddhism and democracy, which is quite interesting. Because the teacher, Ajahn Uthai, I think he got a doctorate degree. He told us that like the Buddha supported um democracy from like listening to the monks, or like everyone kind of has to prepare to participate in the meetings, or like when you give the offering, if you give it to the Buddha, it doesn't mean that um it worth more than giving it to like the monks. So I think that's also interesting.
Hmm.
Also, Buddha gave right to like women as well, because at that time in India, I think, or maybe like Sri Lanka, I'm not sure. They don't have a lot of rights to do stuff, and being able to like to be um in like a woman form of a monk is such a huge thing. And also about the like hierarchy, I think, like obviously lower people, like I- I'm not sure what's the term in English, but they can do some stuff, they
Caste
can
system, right?
study, yeah,
Lady
cast.
caste system.
And like in Buddhism, everyone can kind of like be like participate in like
Mm,
Monkhood.
in like Buddhism practices and stuff. So I think that's interesting as well. That's a piece of history, or
Hmm.
maybe
mm.
it's not,
Well,
but
No, that's the same stuff as we have in Tremidom. But the teacher for our room, right, one, just kind of more liberal and tends to give us an area to critically think about that.
well, let me say this. It is well, okay. So, well, the first thing when I think of when I think of democracy certainly isn't Buddhism, but well, I'm not going to try to justify whether or not comparing Buddhism to democracy is, valid, but I will say it is, I think, another example of, as what we've said before, as where the learning in Thailand, it's pretty oriented on old values and stuff, and stuff like this, democracy and Buddhism, which I'm not going to, as I said, I'm not going to, justify or deny in any way, but it's sort of, learning stuff like this that uh I believe, certainly shows a more conservative side to Thailand's education system or teachers. But I think we were going to talk about the United States politics.
Let's get back to the topic.
Yeah. So the first thing is, I guess it's gonna be local or state governments and the decentralization of its political system.
So like in the US, it's kind of like what federal system, I think. So like the central, which is like the what do you call it, the White House or
Okay,
something.
okay, I can explain this. So
Yeah.
in the United States, the system of government is a federal system where power is more distributed among the states rather than concentrated in a single central government, as in Thailand, for example. And so in the United States, you have, of course, a central government called the federal government, which is, the executive branch, the presidency, the White House, and the legislative branch, Congress, Senate and House of Representatives, and you have the judiciary, which is the Supreme Court, and they are the federal government, and they have the power over the whole country, but they're not, what do you call it? They set policy for the entire country, but at the same time, each state in the United States also have their own state governments with their own state legislatures and own state governor and state Supreme Court and stuff. And they also have the authority to set out some of their own policies, not policies that contradict the federal government per se, but their own policies and say over their state. And this is basically the deal with federalism, a more what do you call it? A more decentralized distribution of power rather than a more centralized uh, uh, what do you call centralization of power. And I would have to say it's pretty fitting for big countries like the US to have a government like this, and so it can be better managed to each state's needs, or how each state wants. But in like countries say like Thailand, which are not as big, a unitary system, which is the opposite of that, would be more fitting. But as I've said before, I was straight off again. But yes, that was my brief explanation of the
Yeah.
federal system of
But
government in the United
but
States.
but some small countries may have federal governments, right? Like Switzerland.
That is correct. Well, Switzerland has a federal government. Malaysia, I believe, has a federal government, and so it does. It doesn't have to be necessarily big countries. As I said, I was straying a bit from the point, but I was just trying to add info, saying that generally the bigger countries, they a federal government system is more better for them. A more decentralized system of power is better for them, and so that's what I was saying.
Also, to give you more examples on fed or concepts on federal governments, like in some states, abortion abortion were legalized, and or LGBTQ marriage were legalized.
Mm.
Oh wait, okay, hold on. Can you repeat that?
LGBTQ maybe legalized in only in some states, or like abortion may also be legalized in some states too.
Okay, see, here's the thing. So usually when there's no federal policy, there's no official policy from the federal government or from Congress about a certain issue, then essentially it's up to the states to determine what they're going to what laws they're going to write about that issue in their state. And as for LGBTQ, in the U.S. it's legal in every state because the Supreme Court ruled it's so in 2015, I believe, and so that's not an issue where there's a conflict. However, in an issue, say for like abortion, for example, right now still legal, but if the Supreme Court were to overturn the decision called Roe v. Wade, which legalized abortion in the United States in 1972, like 50 years ago, then what would happen basically is there is no federal federal precedent that says that you should be able to get an abortion at this minimum, at what do you call it, during this period, as you know, previously established in every state in America. And so it would be up to the states to determine once the Roe v. Wade has been overturned. And some states, they may choose to restrict that right, and there are already some who have tried to do so, and there are some states who have tried to expand those rights. And I might add, in politics, you know, the states expanding the abortion rights would be blue states, democratic states like New York and California, while states restricting abortion rights are going to be Republican states like Texas and Florida and stuff. But as I was saying, so yes, sometimes, you know, policy, it can be a bit of a mishmash between each state because of a lack of, you know, unified federal policy.
Another example of that would be like, okay, sorry. Another example of that would be like after prohibition and like legalize of alcohol consumptions, right? Where like each state legalized like alcohol consumption like differently and like uh not at the same time.
Yes, so one thing, well, as I've already said, you know, there is a pro with federalism because you distribute the power and, you know, you can get a more of a local say in government. But one thing that, one con of the federal system of government is that it can sometimes result in an inconsistent nationwide policy, like, you know, like a hodgepodge of not random, but like varied laws and regulations that are pretty all over the place in some issues, and it can lead to complications. And so that is one drawback of a federal system.
Do you guys have anything on this topic? Because I think this leads quite well to the next topic, which is like current politics issues.
Yes, we can move on.
I think there are lots to talk here, so I'll pass it to Bong.
Currently, there have been some issues in some controversial issues in the United States. The first one that many would come up to their mind would be the shooting massacre and gun control.
Okay, so I think so. This is pretty much a problem that is pretty rare in the world. You don't see many types of these situations happening in like any other developed country in Europe and stuff. And so I think it's a reflection of as we've seen in the many like polls and surveys that most Americans, they want more strict gun laws, sensible common sense measures, which pretty much all other countries have, and yet the United States doesn't have. And so I think the gun control debate that they keep on having after every mass shooting really reflects their sort of inability to uh, come to an agreement on this what do you call it, on this issue, even though the whole people agree, or at least the majority of the people agree, at least. But still, in Congress, there's been very little progress on laws relating to that.
I guess you touch on like how American is different, like how the US is different. And like I think with the like two sides, like politicians, one kind of promote having a gun while another kind of not. So I guess that's kind of hard to make a progress when everyone is just in a complete chaos.
Don't you know there's a lobbyist in the Congress?
Yes. I don't want to stray off topic so much, but yes, the United States government is pretty well, I guess I can say corrupt by like in a certain sense that uh it it doesn't the people aren't really calling the shots. The people that, sure, they're electing their representatives, but most of the time the representatives, they are not really reflecting the people's values and reflecting the people's desires, as we've seen very high uh, demand for the gun laws and restrictions, but members of Congress in I think it was in the Republican Party who are very opposed to these issues are because of the lobbyists from groups like the NRA who own guns and stuff. But I also think another issue to consider is that America is a unique place where they have something called the Second Amendment, which gives every citizen the right to bear arms. And this is not, I don't know if there's any other country in the world that gives citizens rights to own a gun. And so once that's been written into law, into the Constitution, it's going to be pretty difficult to try to try to restrict that, even because any potential legal dispute may or regulation may be found to violate the Second Amendment and stuff. But the gun control debate in America is it's a pretty tiresome one, because again, it doesn't happen anywhere else in the world, and it's more of a reflection on how their political system has failed than anything.
So
Mhm.
also to, to stop this shooting outbreak, the government has been trying to implement the policy of university or socio-economic background check
Mhm.
to limit the people who can own guns. But
Mhm.
anyway, I disagree with this law because people are gonna seek ways to buy guns even though it's illegal.
Well, I think I'm not sure what point you were trying to make there, but uh, there should I don't think anyone here would disagree with me that when I say that there needs to be common sense background checks when you get a gun, that you have to be able to at least have a good reason to own them, and know how to actually use them, and have maybe not that much, but just register ownership, and limits on the amount of ammo and stuff, and these regulations, because these guns, they are, I hate to put it so simply, but they're not toys. They can't just, you can't just play around with them. They're serious weapons and stuff that can take other people's lives. And so I'm not sure if we're having a debate on whether we should have them or not, but if we're going to talk about that, then I would definitely say yes, we should have these gun control laws. But if we were talking more about how in America, there are certain, groups of people, even though they're in the very minority, who don't want to let Congress or have
And
Congress.
to the point I was trying to make was like, although there's a restriction to ban guns, some people would still find ways to purchase it, to purchase those guns.
Well, I mean, I would argue that if there are more regulations, it would be harder for them to do so illegally. But right now in the United States, I'm going to put it simply, but it seems like anyone can buy a gun. Anyone over 18 can buy a gun. It seems that you have to pass very little background checks and stuff, and the shooters that happen sometimes, they're really young. They've only just turned 18, something like that, and so it's a situation that is pretty untenable, and the fact that Congress hasn't been able to fix it is really going to be is a really poor reflection of the current state, the current state of the Congress.
So the main reason for those shootings, namely the Buffalo massacre, is because of white supremacy, right? We can talk about that next.
Ooh, yes.
I think
And,
I
and
can
probably
give a
some
little
sort of
background here
Yes.
Trumpism during the election.
because like America, the US is very diverse, right? It's kind of like I'm not sure what's the term, but I guess it's a bowl of cereal. Like everything is mixed together,
Maybe a
cultures
pot.
and other things. What did you say again?
Maybe a melting pot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. You know quite a lot. Yeah,
Uh,
you know a lot. But it's very diverse in cultures. But obviously some people are quite I guess control, like what do you call it? Controls. What do you call it? Conservative, but I didn't mean that all conservative or people who are conservative are prone to violence, but can you like continue this one?
Well, I mean, it's to the point with white supremacy. It's these people who have been radicalized, and I might make a little bit of a connection to our earlier conversation about online social media and misinformation and radicalization from the internet. But it's basically because of these radicals who, have formed these ideas, these ideologies, and who have decided to um, commit these acts. I don't know, for whatever reasons, but I mean, like, well, wait, I think I just lost my train of thought. Sorry for that, but uh,
Yeah, take your time.
hmm. If you have any other questions, you can ask me first. But the train seems to have left the station, and I won't be able to catch up for at least some time. So
Hmm. I think this is one my strongest part here, which is econ. So we all know that COVID-19 shut down a lot of things, and like government put a lot of subsidies and liquidity in the economies, which is kind of like giving away money and higher policy, which I'm not going to touch about, but doing is obviously cost inflation because like people have money and want to buy stuff while there are limited resources, and obviously there are problems with supply chains because like for example ships couldn't travel properly, or maybe like I think there are like a lot of containers that are stuck in like the bay or something. So the price rise up, and recently the Federal Reserve also raised the interest rate to 0.75, I think. So how do econs affect the current politics and vice versa?
A lot. There's a lot, that in politics that affects economy, and the economy, vice versa, economy affects politics. Now, as regards to the current situation with inflation and the economy, that rising cost of living for people, I think it's going to be pretty tough for the people in power right now to uh, if not justify that and try to find a way to solve that. But as you said, you've explained it pretty clearly. It's because of many issues such as the supply chain problems and more money in the economy. But I think another point that we should add is there is a lot of corporate price gauging where in a country like the United States, where a lot of power, the big corporations have a lot of power, and there are the existence of say monopolies or duopolies or industries where there are dominant companies, and this has allowed these um, has allowed the prices to these companies have raised prices, and that's not well, it's not something that's out of the ordinary, since there's inflation. Sometimes it can rise naturally anyway, but sometimes they've risen it beyond the inflation rate, and they've uh, basically I'm saying that they've taken advantage of the situation, and they've of the high inflation, and they're overcharging, over raising the price, and contributing to this cost of living crisis. And so I think that was another point worth adding. But certainly back to the politics, how this affects the politics. And so it's going, it's certainly going to be a pain for the uh, at least the party in power in many countries right now. I don't believe that there are many countries who are handling it greatly. I mean, some of them aren't doing like catastrophically, but there are some countries who are. There are not what do you call? There are not many countries that I can think of who are doing greatly right now in terms of inflation and stuff. But in terms of catastrophically, I would like to mention like Sri Lanka and stuff. They've been really terrible economically, but I don't think it's a very optimistic. There's not a very optimistic viewpoint in the state of the global economy right now.
Mm.
You did touch about inequality as well, which is like another huge social problem in America, because it's like a free society. So like it's not like Canada where there are some sort of like there are more subsidies and so forth. But I think you also said that the government kind of supports and subsides the big company as well. Like I have seen the Forbes top 50 billionaire top 50 list in families in Thailand, and in 2021, their wealth actually rose up. 34 of the 50, their wealth actually rose up. So during the pandemic and stuff, like the oligarchs are actually like gaining more wealth, which is which I guess what can you interpret from that?
Yes, yes. So I agree because as I've said, as you've mentioned, there has been a very pressing, issue in I don't think just in America, but as in countries like Thailand as well, where the wealth gap has been, not just during Corona, but for many years has been widening between the poor and the rich, and especially during the coronavirus crisis, where many people have fallen into poverty, and while at the same time, there are millionaires and billionaires who are just keep getting richer, and the wealth gap has been expanding, and so I think this is more of a, I think this is a result of, if I may say, this rugged capitalist system where where it's more of, as you said, it's a free market, so it's more of um, a situation where companies have the power to uh, determine the prices, and they have, you know there's not much support for the working people, and they're the companies, they certainly enjoy an advantage, as opposed to some Scandinavian countries with the Nordic models, where these companies, they're still capitalist countries, by the way. Some people mistake them for socialists, but they're still capitalist countries, but they, instead of having letting these businesses keep, growing with low taxes and stuff, they have pretty high compared to other countries taxes on these big corporations, on rich people, which they then use to fund um, programs like welfare programs for like the disadvantaged and stuff, and so the wealth gap is considerably less there. But uh, I think this is I'll just say uh, the the system, uh, how the system of the economy has affected, this wealth gap thing.
Another thing about
Obviously, there are
Well,
yeah,
is that relatable to our previous video, conspiracy theories?
maybe
yeah, another thing about economics and politics that I would like to add on is about how like economic policies plays like a very big role in like votings. So, for example, would be like some subsidiaries such as like fishermen or farmers would tend to like would tend to vote more for politicians with economic policies that would benefit them. So,
yeah,
like the
yeah.
economic policies is a very big part in like how some people determine votes too.
Hmm. I definitely agree because, as you've said, I think this is one of the bigger aspects that people consider when they're thinking about voting for someone, about what they're going to do economically. And apart from, sometimes it could also be like the most important issue, where people you when where people use to decide who to vote for. Uh, and I would have to say that the economic policies of a candidate, they're certainly more prominent than, say, other aspects of the candidate, such as, policies that maybe like social policies. I'm not saying that people don't uh, consider them important as well, but I think most people, at least, would pay attention, quite a lot of attention, to the economic policies of a certain party, or a certain candidate, when they consider voting for someone. So that's a very good point.
Mm, I think
Can uh, Okay, you can go first. Bro.
I think you can go first because
Okay.
my
So
understanding
I
is
think next we can talk about equalities and
I think
something where
co-equalities first
people
is
have been.
better because it's kind of related to current politics issues, and I think we can touch on like social problems later.
What about the time?
s- I think it's been 2 hours, but I guess we can do like maybe 30 minutes more or something.
Uh,
We can do like
So
20 minutes more, yeah, at most
okay,
20 minutes more.
so I guess we are kind of have to speed up. So what do you think about COVID policies? Because there are you have heard the news about vaccines, deaths, mass from the US especially.
Hmm. I mean, there is like a lot of um, it's pretty wide scope of a wide range in terms of COVID-19 policies, you know, from vaccines to mask mandates and stuff. But um, it's certainly less of a controversy here than in the United States, where that issue has become very much politicized, uh, where there are certain sides are against mask mandates or are pretty skeptic of the vaccine, whereas here that's not really pronounced, or if there is, then I think it's not so significant as in the United States as we have seen. But there, I mean, the policies that have been what do you call it, that have been implemented by governments worldwide to try to control the spread of the virus. And I would be okay with it because uh, they're trying to keep public safety, but at the same time, there are also other people who are arguing that it restricts on individual freedoms and liberties to you lead their own life, some sort of thing like that. And there, as I've said, I don't think this is much of a um, political discussion here or in many other countries, because we generally agree that we want to contain the virus and stuff. But it's become pretty a bit, not even a bit, a pretty big mess, a political fight in the United States. But
hmm.
hmm,
Personally, the best way to fight COVID is vaccine, definitely. And moreover, what do you think about protests during the COVID-19 pandemic?
what do I think about what during the
Forecasting.
Protests, going to
Oh,
protest.
um, well, most of the protests were for like some sort of freedom organized by like the far right people who, or some people who I guess felt like they were being their rights were being violated, which um, I guess in certain societies you get a certain right to peacefully protest, but in terms of the cause which they are protesting, I mean, I don't really I don't really know anyone who like agrees with them, or because we just I mean, like, in as I said, in America, it's like an American only thing, where it's been such a big fuss about all these um, COVID regulations put in place to keep people safe. But and on the other hand, some people instead they see it as some sort of restriction on their freedoms. But uh, so I mean, if you were asking me if I agree with the protests, definitely not. But then again, if they protest peacefully, then they're really not breaking any laws, because they do have that right to peacefully protest.
Hmm. it's quite sensitive in the US also. A lot of people believe in anti-vax or even antivirus.
And I think again a little bit of a connection with misinformation and social media and stuff. But yes, it is certainly a dangerous phenomenon where we have a lot, not a majority, or maybe even a small minority, but still, uh, these group of people who are, pretty, skeptical of the vaccine. And I'm not saying that they are wrong to be cautious or stuff about the vaccine, but it's already been proven. You know, there's been proof many times that it's safe, and an allergic reaction or something is very unlikely, even unlikelier than getting bitten by a shark in the ocean. So I think it's much more of a misinformation campaign on the internet that has caused caused this many people to um, believe in the false information that they've spread.
Also, since March, there have been the wars going on in the Ukraine. And I see the politicians from the US are kind of like splitting words, but they apparently do not like do much because I think they are scared of escalating situations, and I think they do send weapons though.
Well, they've certainly sent weapons and funding, but they've avoided getting involved directly by sending, U.S. troops in or something like that, because it could get messy if Russia sees it as a direct involvement, and so they've been trying to be, a bit indirect in their support of Ukraine. But uh, yeah, are we talking about Ukraine now, by the way?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well. Hmm.
I guess we should like I think you that like went off tangents a bit. I think we should like move closer to the topics.
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
What about some social rights, ongoing issues, right? Like LGBT marriage, um, both in Thailand and worldwide.
Hmm. Interesting, because, um, well, in most Western countries, this is already a thing where, marriage is something that is also afforded to same-sex couples rather than just heterosexual couples. The United States has same-sex marriage, and most countries in Europe have them, but there are a lot of countries still in the Middle East and Muslim countries, especially, who are still very against these
It's
these
it's considered a crime.
yes in their religion. And uh, there's I think there's been some, as we've seen in some, like, I think movies or scenes in certain movies that have LGBTQ displays, that were not allowed to be shown or were asked to be uh, re-edited in order to be shown in the countries because they do not wish to expose their citizens to this content. But uh, I think so. It's a different situation in each country. If you're talking about like Western nations who are generally more accepting of the LGBTQ community, then it's already not. I mean, they still face a bit some discrimination, and there's definitely some progress, more progress to be
Hmm.
made. Like in terms of equality, marriage equality and stuff. Been a, it's already been at least in principle achieved, but in say Thailand or in any other place, we're still not there yet. Even though I've seen Thailand, they've in the first reading they've approved the bill for same-sex marriage, the parliament, but still, we still have a bit to go.
Yeah, there's been only one country in Asia that legalized same-sex marriage, which is Taiwan. Even I guess the minister uh of IT is an LGBTQ.
Hmm. Well, China wouldn't like to hear you say like Taiwan is a country, but yeah, Taiwan has managed to legalize same-sex marriage. You know, I commend them for it, and I hopefully other countries can follow suit. And but I guess this issue really depends on each country, whether or not it's a conversation that they're having, because in most Western countries, they've already given same-sex marriage rights, whereas in countries like R and in Asia, we're still grappling with it.
Do you support it?
I do. I support the LGBTQ community and marriage equality wholeheartedly.
What are some other social problems in the US that's kind of affects politics in terms of like locally and bigger scale?
Abortion?
Oh, I mean, if you're asking me about social issues that affect politics, oh, there's like an indefinite
Yeah.
list. Like, there's so many, but abortion was one of them that I mentioned. But um, social factors that there's just like so many to name. So you're gonna have to be a bit more specific than that.
I think we did
What's
mention some like
Can you
very
name like some main ones, like main things?
Social issues. Um,
I think we already did like quite a lot of that too.
yeah, there's
We
a lot
already
of
did.
that.
Yeah.
And
Mm.
as I've said, it varies from country to country too. Maybe in the country like the United States, abortion rights, gun control, um, voting rights was an aspect too, and it's still pretty important. Something like those. In a country like say like Thailand, though I'm not as informed on Thai politics as I probably should be as a Thai citizen. I mean, I know the basics, but uh, I don't really like politics when it comes to my own country, because it's my own country and they're so bad, and it's fine. It's better to make fun of other countries for their um, bad politicians than ours, but in Thailand, some social issues, as we were saying, we were having a debate on marriage equality for the LGBTQ community. What do we have? We have uh, I hope I don't get sued or go to jail for saying this, but we also have some issues regarding the monarchy, and I'm going to leave it at that. Everyone knows there are some issues with that, and
Also, like free alcohol production.
hmm, yeah, well, that's another example, but it is really wide. There are a plethora of subjects that we definitely can't cover in a few hours. Social issues.
Yeah, the law was trying to demonopolize the alcohol production in Thailand, but I don't know much about that.
Me neither. So
I think it,
We'll leave that
I think
here.
I think it's a great place to kind of sum up here. What do you guys think?
yes, I would agree.
So can you like recap us a little bit on what we discussed and talked today?
Well, we discussed the definition of politics, generally what it refers to, and, we discussed, forms of, politics as ideologies and stuff, such as liberal or conservative, and, standpoints. Politics and government, which is a very closely related issue. We talked about different forms of government, such as democracy and autocracy, and federal governments and unitary governments, such as stuff like that. And we also talked more about specific policies, especially in the United States, such as current policies like gun control, or gun violence, or the economy right now with inflation, and with COVID policies, something like that. And this is that was a very brief conclusion, but this is more or less the things that we talked about.
So, as a world citizen and also a Thai citizen, how can we apply the knowledge of politics to our daily life? I think everyone should answer this.
Like personally, I think I'll go first. Personally, like I think politics is something that you should care about, even though like you might not like or you might not have like some interested in, but in general it affects your life a lot and people around you a lot and the society a lot. So by knowing and have some base knowledge between of politics and how it functions, how should we interact with it, how should we use our rights, it's very important to be like a good and like not just good, but be aware of issues and our society in general.
Hmm. Well, I would certainly agree, and I think it is very important for the whatever your generation is, even if you're young or old, to be remain engaged in our government, in our policies, in our democracy, in our discussion about how the country should be governed. And it is also very important that you keep informed of current events and um uh, developments in the country, and have some basic knowledge of uh, the situation, political situation, economic situation, or social situation in your country, so that you can what do you call you can more smarter. Well, what would be a good word, but
Well
more
informed.
more informed and a more open, more wise way to engage in politics in the future, when I'm not sure if anyone here is 18 yet, but in the future when we will be given the right to vote and to make
Yeah.
pretty important decision for the country. And so it is very important for everyone, regardless of your generation, age, or status, to at least keep informed of basic issues of politics in the country.
Uh, I would say to stand up for your belief is very important. We have the power to take action in lots of different ways. Whenever an opportunity comes along for you to support what you believe in, you can raise your voice up. Maybe you can believe that there should be a proportion for in the parliament for male, female, and LGBT representatives. You can believe in anything and stand up for your own belief.
For me, I think as we have seen, like the government of the United States, even though we are not live, we do not live in the US, it really affects our life, right? For example, Donald Trump, um, Joe Biden, obviously their policies, like general policy and like economics policy really affects our lives. And also politics are not just like politics. Politics are also related to economics, to social aspects. So I think that's important because that's basically our lives. So I think we should just keep in touch with politics. And obviously with the recent election in Bangkok, I think people have been like active, like the most active as they can be. I think a lot of people have gone out to vote, and I think that's very nice because it's important to exercise your rights and to express your thoughts, as Pam already said. So do you have
You have
any?
any reflections, Yuki? Or
Not
you have
really.
slept?
It's quite late now.
Yeah, true.
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess we can leave it to Juan to finish thing off.
Oh, well, first of all, thank you guys for the opportunity to come and talk. It's been really fun and enlightening to hear, all the different opinions and be able to give, my viewpoint and my information to you guys. And so hopefully you guys can all stay updated on politics, and uh, that goes to anyone watching as well. Uh, Please also, yes, make sure to pay a little bit of just a little bit of your attention to politics. It is important, even though it may seem like a faraway issue for you from day to day. But uh, I just uh, make sure to keep it in your mind just a little bit, so that in the future, when you have to make these decisions in our democracy, so you can be an engaged and wise citizen.
Yeah, thank you very much for guiding us. I personally I genuinely learned a lot. I genuinely learned a lot from this episode. So thank you for being our guide.
Thank you.
Yes, yes, of course. Thank you. You're welcome, guys. Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Yes, of course.
Um,
Thanks for coming too.
thank you.
It means um a lot to me. I think your viewpoints are quite mature, and obviously I think you are a pretty wise man. So I hope we can maybe do an episode with you in the future.
Of course.
Um, but I think this is where we end here.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Bye.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Mm.